Okay. Well, welcome to the studio. Having a go at this. This will be a very interesting one experiment, but it should be a little bit of fun. Why don't you just quickly introduce yourself in case someone's watching and they don't know who you guys are?
Sure. I'm Donna Saville. Well, I lead our church engagement team, which supports our 68 churches in Queensland. So it's a privilege serving our churches. My home church is Southport Church of Christ, and my husband Bryce is a pastor there at Southport.
Phenomenal.
And I'll work very closely with Donna, obviously.
Yep.
I'm Tim. Most people know me. Work in the church and community engagement team. I like Collingwood. Collingwood's my thing, and we won on the weekend, so very pleased with that.
Awesome. I guess, yeah, I'm Steve. I locally serve at Burleigh Church Christ, and also I'm on your team, Donna, and therefore on your team, Tim,
Oh,
and
really
therefore
good.
on the whole Queensland.
Welcome to the team, Steve.
And therefore on Queensland Church Christ
Mhm.
team. And so I guess we wanted to gather because there was 3 values that were brought out. Well, they've been out for a while around our church leadership and how we spiritually lead. We're discussing beforehand what we call these values. I suggested the 3 infinity stones of the Church of Christ Queensland Infinity Gauntlet. Yeah, what are you leaning towards?
I'm leaning towards maybe elements of spiritual leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 elements.
3 elements.
Our core values in spiritual leadership of our churches.
And why do we have those? What brought those about?
Well, it should be said up front that we're not on the same page as Thanos.
Yeah, no,
in
that's
terms
true.
of
That's
the stones.
true. That's true.
So,
Well, good. I was actually thought
just
you
wanted to clarify.
good Marvel
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah, hey, I'm
yeah.
old, but not too
No,
old.
I wasn't implying the age. I was
That's
just
good.
impressed. So
Well, the 3 things we really care about, which speak broadly to good leadership, healthy leadership in a local congregation, being Christ-centered, well-led and safe and legal,
Yeah.
and no genius on our part. They come from, well, Donna and I probably got 60 years of church life between us and a family heritage, and a real wrestle and struggle with what spiritual leadership is and what it can be. It comes from many years of facilitating conflict
Yeah.
and health. Sometimes you forget the health bit because we get so entrenched in trying to work through the differences, the values clashes of people in local church.
Yep.
And so after, going to conferences, being on the ground, being in the trench, these 3 elements, infinity stones,
Yep.
not part of Thanos' agenda. We feel like if local leadership groups, elders, boards, however you construct that, if they're actually having this conversation about their people, about the agenda of God, about the community they serve and live in, we reckon that's ballpark for moving along the grid into a healthy state. So we've got these published on the website. We've discussed them ourselves. We certainly raise it every time we have an opportunity in a local church or a forum or a regional gathering to talk through these things. And we hope they become part of the furniture of this discussion.
Right.
And we hope at some point this becomes a whole lot of fun for elders. We want leadership groups to be having a life-giving experience themselves.
Yeah.
Because we actually exist to prosecute the agenda of Christ's mission, right? So, yes, there's healthy conflict about that, about direction, where you spend money, how you manage staff, what you purchase next, where you invest in the community. But if you run it through this lens, if you are Christ-centered and you wrestle about what he's got to say, that should be the best conversation of your life.
Yeah, great.
And finding alignment around that. I could go on forever.
No, it's good. And I
So
guess
that's where we're coming from. And we want this to be a conversation in our
Yeah.
movement. We're not sitting here as, the peak body of all things, Church of Christ going, you shall. We're saying we reckon this is best practice. And we think if you put this into play in your local church life, just maybe the hunch is this is going to be a healthy dialogue.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess that's the heart.
Hmm.
That's the heart behind this is these 3 things appear on documents, or they appear at gatherings, or they appear at an AGM, or are presented. But there's actually, when you see them as a lens, there's actually practical outworking of that, which can be fun. And so that was the heart behind this, having a real conversation around these questions, seeing if we can put some practicality to it, but also some experience and stories.
Yeah.
And
And the reason that we do this behind these things that are often behind the scenes is actually to free up church leadership to focus on their mission and their ministry that God's called them to do.
phenomenal.
So these three areas we find if they're done right, it frees people up. But they're also things that can trip people up if they're not done right. So we want to help them as much as we can to deal with that and to avoid those pitfalls. So that they can really take strides in the areas that they're gifted in as local church leaders.
Phenomenal. And what are the three things? What are the
Well,
Infinity Stones?
Good. Thanks for asking, Steve. I'm glad you did. That Christ-centered,
Yep.
well-led, and safe and legal.
There you go. And just not that this is a crucial point, but both Black Panther and Captain America in the comics wield the Infinity Stone and the Hulk. So we don't have to be Thanos. There
Excellent.
are good guys.
Great.
If that sticks across our movement.
Is he referring to me as the Hulk?
No,
Does that happen?
no.
For the Enneagram mates,
there you
the
go.
Hulk is a hero.
He is a hero. He's
Yeah.
a hero. So he's just got some anger issues. So Christ-led is the first one we've got there.
Christ-centered, actually.
Christ-centered. No,
Mm.
good correction. You were right. I tested you and you were correct. Christ-centered. I guess when I first see that, isn't every church Christ-centered?
Well, we would hope so.
Yeah.
Well, I think as Christians, we all like to, we know that we need to keep our eyes on Christ, and that actually gives us life, and it gives us the abundant life that Jesus promised. That's how we do good ministry out of the overflow. That's where we see fruit. That's where we see God working. And so, I think that would be something that everyone would jump on and say, yep, we absolutely want to be Christ-centered as churches and as church leaders. So, that's an easy one, that one.
Yeah. I imagine the motivation for everyone, hopefully in our churches, would be that. But it's fair to say sometimes it's not direct, or it needs a recentering or readjustment. Is that fair?
I think from the very first church, we have seen that it needs readjustment and recentering.
What do you mean? No church has ever recentered or split or become another denomination ever. So no. So what does that look like though? What's that mean? Christ-led? Does it mean they need more prayer meetings? What's it actually mean to have a church?
We're not going to put a cap on
Christ-centered?
prayer meetings. That's
Yeah.
for
No.
sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Paul said, "Be consumed by it." Prayer, that is. Look, from where we're coming from in terms of being churches of Christ, there might be a clue in the tagline. To put Jesus at the middle of all your deliberation, to put Jesus at the middle of the formation of your own heart and mind and body, spirit, to put Jesus at the formation of your governance group, to be intentional about having the right conversation about where he might be leading that local group of people. And that's the aspiration. And lots of our people get that right. But to say it up front, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we want to dialogue around a whole bunch of things that could be an interest or a lobby group within your congregation or some part of the leadership that's just on the table as habit of human. Sometimes we drift away from what the real conversation is and we get stuck down rabbit holes. I think that's normal. And so to name being Christ-centered up front is to, like you said, is to keep bringing that focus. And if we lurch off to the left or the right, we bring correction back. What is the agenda of Jesus for this particular body of people? We can say broadly what that is for the church globally, since he said, go make disciples.
Love it.
Right? We talk about that all the time.
Yep.
And that's true. It's undeniable. That is the agenda that God has set before us. In every single context I've ever looked in or been a part of, that how piece has been different. And so what is the context and what has Jesus got to say to it? If you're an urbanised setting, like Burleigh, like Southport, like Sunnybank, there's a different set of assumptions in that community, how people hear about Jesus. So the governance group needs to sit down and work that out. If you're with Dan Gill out in Roma, or Derek and Jody out at St George, there's a few different lenses that those people participate in regional Queensland or Australia, where the making disciples and being Christ-centered, the how piece will be very different. And that's okay. But the real discussion at the leadership group is how are we being Christ-centered, and really applying everything we've got into that space. Does that make sense?
It makes. I mean, as a local leader, it was so easy. If people watching it don't want to admit this, but so easy in the last couple of years to make the centre COVID safe, or the centre, what your thoughts on vaccines are, or at the centre. It's so easy when there's a building. So easy to go, oh yeah, we got Christ there, but at the centre is our building, or the centre is our raging youth, seniors.
Right.
Insert silo or ministry, which are all good things. But I know, at least for me, and I can appreciate that centering is so important, to have a team that are constantly asking that question. Hang on, we spent 2 hours of our meeting on the budget now. Is there something else we should be asking? And that question, are we Christ-centered? It's good. Do you have anything?
Can I just add to that, Steve?
Yeah,
I think
please.
it's a great example of how a leadership group, given the context, changed and the pressure was on for us. In terms of being church in COVID, there was a whole lot of spectrum on people's opinion about how we made our way through that. And I imagine, and particularly in leadership space, there was pressure to go one way or the other. So in that context, vaccine, no vaccine, meat, no mask, right? All that pressure was on the Australian church. It was on the world church. So in Queensland, Donna and the team and others, we put out what we thought was best practice and tried to encourage people to stick together somehow. But having the Christ-centered conversation in that context is akin to saying, are we formed to make these decisions because of the pressure? Are we going to react? Or are we going to be adults and hold some ground here, knowing that there's push and pull for everybody so we can navigate through? And the Christ-centered conversation for leaders at that point is, how do we stay in unity and honour Christ in this moment when there's so much anxiety and unknown? And how do we honour people of different opinion? Because we had polarised opinion in some of our congregations about that. And I make no judgment that people in this country choose. But leadership had to come together and say, Lord, how do we hold this thing? And that's the right conversation. But in order to do that, you've got to be formed in such a way to be adults to have it.
It's good.
So it's a live play, what you've just said, I think, and it's important to reflect on.
No, it's good. It's good. And I like that Christ isn't a policy, isn't just a concept, an idea. It's a relationship. And so that's ongoing in whatever the next, hopefully not next pandemic or whatever's next for our country and the world.
We're not letting Thanos have that third stone.
That's right. No,
Black Panther and Hulk, we've got to hold that apart.
There we go. That's right. So the Avengers are needed. What do you think? What's it look like? Or give me some examples of what it looks like when a church is Christ-led. I might throw it to Donna on the spot. But have you got examples in the top of your head of what it looks like when a church is Christ-led, either in theory or actual practical examples?
A Christ-centered church and Christ-centered leadership. There's some really great stories coming from our churches where elders are trying new ways of doing things, and governance groups, instead of meeting to talk about business every couple of weeks when they have their meeting, they'll actually have a time of just getting together and checking in with each other, of praying together, of seeking God together, of doing that formation work together and individually. So I think that's part of it, being Christ-centered. And then we do see fruit of being Christ-centered is good relationships within the church. So it means that we value unity. We have the hard conversations, not just ones that are easy or ones that are brushing over things. We have a process for dealing with conflict in our churches because that is the biblical way, and that's actually honouring God by doing that. And we see people ministering, as I said before, out of that overflow. So we see our church leaders, and then they're empowering their ministry leaders and empowering volunteers. And so we see a freedom of God moving in our churches when we are Christ-centered.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. Any additional thoughts on top of that?
Yeah, look, we like it when our churches thrive. and move along that continuum. If they start in an ordinary place and make it, like the other night I mentioned, and a shout out to the crew at Harvey Bay, one of our very own Harvey Bay, one of our own churches in Harvey Bay, who, as we all know, well documented, well publicised issues 212, and you know, like adults, the core group that were left faced tough challenges, to the point where Jackie and Andrew Crichton come along and start to lead that congregation. It's starting to thrive.
So good.
And they look happy.
Yep.
They feel like they're making a difference in their community. They're very down the formation road and inviting people to be disciples at a level where it takes time to form. And they've started a night service with the young ones. I mean, we couldn't have imagined that in 2011 with the abject disaster which was unfolding for humans who, on both sides of that argument, claimed to be on the agenda of Jesus.
Yeah. Yep.
So you get that space where it's liminal, it's hard, it's weighty, and now we've moved on through the grace of God and through good leadership. And by no means is it a perfect spot at all. But Jackie and Andrew are doing a fantastic job because they're formed people themselves. And so the Christ-centered piece comes naturally for them as a first question.
Yeah, great. I'll get just to pull that a bit forward your mic and
Mhm.
just to make sure you're leaning in.
I think
yeah.
some of the things that we see as churches are more Christ-centered is we see people growing deeper in their relationship with Jesus. So we see people in the church, we see people coming to faith in Jesus for the first time. We see people finding their purpose in his kingdom, so they're using his gifts, they're finding freedom in that, they're serving with joy in those areas that where they're talented and gifted. And we see people experience freedom in their life and experiencing those gifts of the Spirit and fruit of the Spirit in their life, which is really empowering. So good to see. There's so many good stories out there, and we love to rejoice with our churches as they are enjoying those stories and telling those stories.
Oh, that's awesome. I just had that, like, even I think one of you mentioned it's in our name. I think you mentioned Tim Church of Christ. And it'd be a funny, well, an interesting and maybe challenging reflection exercise to go, if people in our community were to name our church, would it be Church of, what would they see? And so would they see aspects of Christ? Would he be at the center, or would it be Church of? And I know even here at Burleigh, we do a bit of stuff with the poor and food help and things. We're constantly balancing, are we Church of? We love that, but are we Church of give heaps of stuff away, which is awesome. Generosity is part of Christ, but we hope that people see on top of that, we're not just a service, but also people of God. And so it's an interesting question to ask ourselves, even as people watching this or listening to this podcast. What would your church be known as? Is it at center, or is it the Church of phenomenal car park, or Church of awesome signage? Whatever it is, which is okay. But is at the center? Is it people you're known by Christ? So it's good. So what would it look like to involve Church of Christ Queensland in that conversation? If you're a church leader sitting there going, I want to be more Christ-centered, what does that look like? I mean, we don't have to run it through. It's more of a relationship with talking to you guys and the team, but what could that look like?
Yeah, they could reach out to their regional engagement partner and start having those conversations, because that might look missional, or it might look like formation, might look like some leadership development, or some they could go through the Transformation Trek, which has monthly spiritual practices. So that'd be great for a leadership group to go through, for a whole church to go through. Yeah, so plenty of resources. They could check out our website. But, yeah, as you said, it's relational. So, yeah, feel free to reach out to the church engagement team or your local regional engagement partner, or to each other on our Facebook page or through your local networks when you're praying with other pastors and leaders from your area.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you opening it up a bit. Obviously, there's so much more that can be said about when you open up Christ-centered churches. And I guess people are free to, if they're seeing whatever platform they're watching this on, they're free to contact us, comment on this, ask us other questions, and maybe we'll open those up in a future one. But I really appreciate you guys sitting and, I love the heart to see our churches more Christ-centered. After all, he's the king of this kingdom.
Amen.
And so, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.